All right, let's jump right in and tackle one of the toughest, most profound puzzles at the very heart of the Christian faith. It's a question that's been on people's minds for centuries, and it all kicks off with one seemingly straightforward promise. And boom, there it is, the central paradox. We're told that Jesus Christ is the absolute pinnacle of mercy, but his suffering was just unimaginable. So how can both things possibly be true? It feels like a total contradiction. So in this explainer, we're going to dig in and see how the source material tries to entangle this whole thing. And look, this isn't some modern gotcha question. The source of the paradox is right here, straight out of the Sermon on the Mount. The tension is baked right into the scriptures. If this promise holds true, then what on earth happened on the cross? Well, according to the source material, this entire puzzle, it all comes down to a huge misunderstanding of one single word: mercy. What we think it means and what it means in a scriptural sense are two totally different things. Okay, so on the one hand, you've got our usual assumption, right? Mercy means you get a pass, you avoid suffering in your day-to-day life. But the source says, nope, that's not it at all. The scriptural meaning is something else entirely. It's not about getting fair treatment from the world. It's a covenantal promise, a sacred deal, really, that you get from God. And it's focused on the end game, on redemption, not on making today easier. So how do we solve this? Well, the source breaks it down into 3 key steps. First, the promise of mercy comes from God, not from other people. Second, and this is the big twist, Christ's suffering wasn't a failure of mercy. It was the actual mechanism of mercy. And third, the mercy he was promised wasn't denied. It was just delayed. The ultimate mercy wasn't avoiding the cross. It was conquering it through resurrection. And this, right here, this is the core idea that flips the whole thing on its head. Christ didn't fail to get mercy. He became mercy. He chose to absorb all that pain so that others could receive mercy from God's judgment. He wasn't the victim of a paradox. He was the living, breathing answer to it. Okay, so this whole reframing of mercy, it's not just about solving this one specific problem. The source argues it's actually a peek into a much bigger pattern, a pattern of how God reveals truth. And, spoiler alert, it's almost always the exact opposite of what we would naturally expect. And the source actually gives this a name, the law of divine inversion. The basic idea is that God's ways aren't just a little different from ours. They're often a complete 180. And the source argues this is intentional. It's designed to make us question our own assumptions about how the world is supposed to work. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. You know, our logic says victory comes from power. God's logic says it comes from surrender. We think life is about preservation. God's logic says it's through death. Strength through dominance versus strength through weakness. The cross is the ultimate mind-bending example of this entire pattern in action. And hey, this isn't some newfangled idea. The Apostle Paul was talking about this 2,000 years ago. He said divine logic seems like foolishness to our regular way of thinking because it's just operating on a completely different level. You have to kind of shift your whole mindset to even begin to see it. Okay, but wait a minute. This divine inversion idea, it brings up a really important, kind of tricky question. If God's logic is supposed to feel counterintuitive, how do we know we're not just making excuses for something that's, well, just plain contradictory? To figure that out, the source takes this exact same idea and applies it to another major Christian doctrine. Yeah, I mean, where's the line, right? If we're told not to trust our own logic on some things, how can we tell the difference between a profound divine mystery and just a man-made mess that doesn't add up? All right, to tackle that question, the source puts 2 big ideas side by side. On the left, you've got the paradox of the cross. The source says this comes from Revelation, it makes moral sense even if it's hard, and you can actually live it. But then on the right, it looks at the doctrine of the Trinity, and here the argument is different. It says the source is really philosophy mixed with scripture, that it's abstract and even contradictory, and you can't really live it. You can only defend it by saying it's ineffable, beyond words and therefore beyond understanding. Yeah, and look at this symbol. The source argues that these kinds of super complex formulas, like one substance, 3 persons, they didn't come from a clear, straightforward revelation. They came from a need to fight philosophical battles, to defend the doctrine against other ideas. The answer was decided first, and then the complex explanation was built around. Okay, so you've got to be asking, why do so many smart, sincere people believe in it then? And the source is clear. It's not saying they're unintelligent. Not at all. It's more about the power of tradition. about seeing intellectual submission as a good thing, and the fact that this doctrine acts like a guardrail to protect the idea that Christ is divine. It's something that's just become sacred over centuries of practice and deep emotional investment. And this quote from Joseph Smith really sums up the whole argument. If we start wrong, it will be a hard thing to get right. See, the point isn't about sincerity. It's about starting with the wrong assumptions, philosophical ones, not revelatory ones. And if your starting point is off, well, it's almost impossible to end up in the right place. So all of this leads us to the source's big, challenging conclusion. It all boils down to what we're really looking for in our faith. Are we trying to revere God, or are we just defending confusion? And here it is, the central point. The source isn't saying we should get rid of mystery. Far from it. It's all about the idea that God is bigger than we can imagine. But what it is saying is that we have to be careful not to confuse that genuine reverence for mystery with just a tolerance for things that are incoherent, things that don't just go beyond logic, but actually break logic. And this chart really makes that final distinction crystal clear. The goal, according to the source, is to embrace revealed mystery, a truth that comes from God that's way deeper than we can fully get our heads around. The danger zone is when we start accepting manufactured incoherence, basically a human idea that violates logic, but we defend it by slapping the label mystery on it to protect it. So to wrap up that case study, the source's conclusion is pretty ironic. It says the doctrine of the Trinity was created with good intentions to protect the mystery of God. But in the end, it accidentally swapped out a relational God you can know for a set of abstract metaphysical ideas that actually make God harder to know. And so that leaves us right here with this final, powerful question. It's what this whole analysis has been driving at. What does true faith really ask of us? Does it ask us to humbly embrace a profound mystery, or to have the clarity and courage to reject what seems like logical incoherence? The source definitely has its take, but that's a question we're all left to think about.